Wolves in Warm Waters focuses on a more recent component of Caribbean history and explores what occurred when German U-boats invaded the region during World War II. Richards is of the view that this almost forgotten episode of history needs to be returned to its rightful place at the intersection of global politics and Caribbean development, which brings us to this moment. So ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to call to the microphone the author of the book, Sea Wolves in Warm Waters. Here now is Clement Baba Richards to tell us all about why he wrote the book. Put your hands together for him, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, Master of Ceremony Raymond. Only you can do it this way. And I must tell you, it's quite good to hear all these things said about you. Normally it's said when you're dead. It makes me feel very good, actually. And the question is, why did I write Sea Wolves? Because I wanted to. Thank you very much. Oh, no. I have a speech. Sorry, I have a speech. Why did I write Sea Wolves in Warm Waters? I have to begin with the kind of child I was. An avid reader of war comics and other books that took me everywhere except home. I devoured stories about World War II in Britain, the rest of Europe, Russia, North Africa, the Pacific, epic battles, famous generals, dramatic turning points. Those comics and books shaped my imagination. But in all that reading, one thing never once occurred to me, that right here in the Caribbean itself, it had been a major theater of warfare. For a long time, the Caribbean in my mind and in the books I read was a tropical backdrop, not a battlefield. That changed by accident. Years later, when I was doing research for a documentary on Free French volunteers in Dominica at the archives, as I told Miss Charles, I expected to find material on young men leaving the neighboring French islands and passing through Dominica to join General Charles de Gaulle. But in addition to that, the U-boat threat in our region kept surfacing. German submarines, attacks on ships, torpedoes in waters I had known all my life. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back on a war I thought I knew, revealing that part of it had unfolded not just over there in the North Atlantic, but right here in our home seas. Sea Wolves in Warm Waters is therefore an attempt to correct that blindness, both our own here in the Caribbean and the blind spot in the historical imagination of others. Too often, historians and researchers in the UK, the US, and Canada, the countries most directly connected to the Battle of the Caribbean, have treated this campaign as a footnote to the quote-unquote real Battle of the Atlantic. My book is a way of saying no. No, this was not a sideshow. This was one of the crucial components of one of the longest and most decisive campaigns of World War II. The Battle of the Atlantic has been richly documented in the annals of World War II. There are countless books, films, studies that explore the convoy battles in the North Atlantic, the U-boat happy times, the technological struggle between submarine and escort. Yet, within that vast literature, the Battle of the Caribbean, our chapter in that story, is largely forgotten or briefly mentioned. Even more troubling though, the Caribbean itself is rapidly forgetting or has already largely forgotten the important role we played in that struggle. The memory is fading not only from foreign histories, but from our own consciousness. So Sea Wolves in Warm Waters, in a sense, is an effort to set the record straight. It is an attempt to place the Battle of the Caribbean in its rightful place in the broader history of World War II. I wanted to show that our warm waters, so often imagined as distant from global events, were in fact a critical corridor of oil and shipping, a place where the war came close to shore, and where decisions in Berlin, London, and Washington translated into fires on our horizon. The book is also very deliberately an attempt to highlight the incredible sacrifice of Caribbean merchant seamen. Do you know this story? Do you know about Caribbean merchant seamen? Anybody? Everybody? Nobody. These men sailed under British flags in British convoys, but many of them came from our islands. They died in large numbers during the Battle of the Caribbean, often unrecognized and in many cases unnamed. When we talk about the Caribbean's contribution to World War II, we usually highlight the pilots, sailors, and soldiers who fought in Europe, North Africa, or the Middle East. And that service was real and noble. But when we look closely at the records, the number of Caribbean merchant seamen who perished or were injured right here in the Caribbean far outweigh, and in some cases far outshines, the casualties among our uniformed troops. Let me give just one example. In 1942, there was an attack on Castries in St. Lucia, and in that attack, 7 local dock workers were killed in a single raid. If I'm correct, and I invite others to scrutinize the evidence, that single incident, claimed more St. Lucian lives than the total number of military fatalities from Dominica and from several islands. As far as I know, I think 3 persons died in the Second World War from Dominica. I would mention one person who is related to them now. Yet, we do not know their names. There is no rule of honor, no simple plaque listing who they were. That silence is not accidental. It is rooted in the way the British Empire recorded its dead. Merchant seamen from the Caribbean were often recorded not as sons of particular islands, but as quote-unquote British. Remember, some of us are old enough to remember that we were all British. Yeah. Their individuality was folded into a wider imperial category. In practice, that meant that many families back home were left with stories, not documents, grief, but no record. Seawolves in warm waters is in part an attempt to push back against that deletion, to name what can be named, to map what can be mapped, and to recognize a burden of sacrifice that have been carried too quietly for too long. I also hope that in time, the people in St. Lucia will be able to reconstruct more of that story of the 7 dock workers and give them the recognition they deserve. Another issue that troubled me deeply as I researched this book was the way we memorialize or fail to memorialize our merchant seamen. In the English-speaking Caribbean, only Barbados has a dedicated monument to the merchant seamen who perished during the Battle of the Caribbean. That alone should give us pause. Worse still, even when we do hold annual Remembrance Day celebrations in November, the sacrifice of these merchant mariners is often not mentioned at all. We remember the soldiers, the sailors, the airmen, and we should. But we say nothing about the men who crewed the ships that kept their armies fed and fueled, and actually the supplies that kept the planes, that made the planes actually for the airmen. And many of these were our own people. I want to use this occasion to invite those in authority to correct this omission. It does not require a grand gesture. Sometimes history can be moved forward by a simple sentence. I would therefore like to suggest that in future Remembrance Day speeches, there be added one line, a simple line, something like, quote, "We also dedicate this remembrance to the merchant seamen from our island who perished in the Caribbean Sea during World War II." Simple, short and sweet. That is all. One line, one small change, but a deeply significant one, because it acknowledges that these men existed, that their service counted, and that the death were part of our story too. And I had a special message for the Minister of Culture, which is not there, but okay, I'll deliver it to you, my dear. My sir. That's actually, I would like to say to our Minister of Culture, through the representatives here, that our Minister of Culture, under whose portfolio I understand the Remembrance Day activities fall, will consider supporting this initiative in Dominica. So I guess you would be able to convey that, and I think I would be counting on you for this. How's that? Okay, yes, but you can convey it. Yes. And that is important. That is very important. And just think of it. Every year we celebrate the dead from the Second World War. And we wear all kind of fancy things, and we have poppies and stuff. We march up and down the town, and when we were small we used to get buns and cooks and things, right? But not once they mentioned the merchant seamen. And these seamen died in numbers. I mean, like, we're talking about hundreds of them, you know? And most of them actually died just off Trinidad. And it's really ironic that Trinidad does not have a merchant seaman memorial. But that's another story. Writing this book has also brought me into direct contact with living memory in a very moving ways. As a result of some of the pre-release promotional activities for SeaWorlds, I received a message from someone in St. Lucia, posted on a St. Lucian Facebook page. Actually, it's I Love St. Lucia. It reads as follows, quote, "Yes, I was told my father was on one of the battleships that was bombed in 1944. He means torpedoed. And I was born on the 8th of April, 1944. So I was told his name is Mac Williams Hector. Again, I was told he is from Dominica. If you knew him, I would love to hear from you," unquote. Real. That is a direct result of this book. Thinking about what is contained in that short message, think about what is contained in that short message. A man who has grown up with only fragments. Quote, "I was told my father was on one of the ships that was bombed. I was born on the date referred to earlier. His name was Mac Williams Hector. I was told he was from Dominica," unquote. There is no photograph in that message, no service number, no official letter, just a name, a date, and a longing. Quote, if you knew him, I would love to hear from you," unquote. That is what forgetting looks like at the personal level. Not a deliberate act, but a slow loss of information until all that remains is a handful of words and a hope that somebody, somewhere, might remember. So I want to use this platform not only to launch a book, but to send out a small signal across Dominica and the Dominican diaspora, and by extension, the Caribbean diaspora. If anyone hearing or reading this message knows anything about an individual named Mac Williams Hector, reportedly from Dominica, and who served on a ship that was torpedoed in 1944, I would be very grateful if you would contact me. My number is 277-2911, and that is also my WhatsApp number. I am serious about this. This is not a publicity stunt. Sometimes History moves not only in archives, but from small responses. If seawolves in warm waters can help make these connections, then it is serving its purpose. So in the end, I wrote this book for several intertwined reasons. I wrote it because as a Caribbean person who grew up on stories of war elsewhere, I needed to understand the war that passed through our own waters. I wrote it because the Battle of the Caribbean deserves to stand where it belongs, within the central narrative of the Battle of the Atlantic, not at its margins. I wrote it to honor the merchant seamen and dock workers whose names were lost in imperial paperwork, but whose lives mattered. And I wrote it so that when we speak of World War II in the Caribbean in the future, we will not do so from hearsay or fragments, but from a place of knowledge, dignity, and memory. So, if after reading this book, even a few people in the Caribbean and elsewhere could say, quote, I did not know this happened here, but now I do, unquote, then seawolves in warm waters will have done